Well, good afternoon. My first goal today was to not trip on that top step and take out the new painting here this evening. So first goal accomplished, right? Well, I grew up outside Youngstown. My grandfather was a steel worker, my dad was an electrician, and I was a lover of cities. I loved everything about them. Architecture, people, diversity, I just couldn't get enough. And when my parents bought me the Ohio Almanac when I was 13, and I've now just disclosed to you the origin of my childhood nerdiness, right? Getting the Almanac was like a big deal for me. There was something in those pages that was interesting, and that was that Columbus was the only place in Ohio that was growing. And I thought, why was Columbus different than the city that I grew up in? So after years of studying Columbus, my father brought me here for my 16th birthday. It was 1983. We stayed at the Hyatt Regency, and I got my first ride in a taxi cab. But that visit to Columbus solidified for me why Columbus was so special. And so I stand here today, 27 years later, and I get to share with you how I think Columbus is changing. A city that you all spend every day in. And as a lover of maps and statistics, I'm here to share with you those things that I think are interesting, and I hope you think they're pretty interesting too. It's a very different city than the one my dad first brought me to. Well, in the 80s, when I was a kid studying Columbus, this was a rapidly growing region. In fact, Columbus added about 130,000 new residents, while the rest of the state lost 80,000 people. In the 90s, Ohio did better, and Columbus did better. We added about 200,000 people in that period. Well, the last decade has looked an awful lot like the 1980s, a very troubled time. In fact, in the last 9 years, the state of Ohio has added 189,495 people, and Columbus added 189,005 of them. Okay? It's basically Columbus is leading the state. So my first question was, where are people moving to Metro Columbus from? That was the first question I wanted to answer. Well, it's important to know that Columbus is actually adding people. I said we added 189,000 people, and 34,000 of that was people who moved here from another city. There's three ways a city can grow. People move from one city to another. You can have babies over deaths, which is natural increase, or you could have international arrivals. But we had 34,000 more people move into our community than move out. And by the way, we're the only place in Ohio where more people are moving into than moving out. So Forbes magazine did some interesting research on mobility in 2008, and this is what they found. The number one place people were moving to Columbus from? Cleveland, right? Right, I'm sure there's several of you in the room from Northeast Ohio, right? In 1 year, 800 people left Cleveland for Columbus. Next on the list was Dayton, 752 people. After Dayton was Youngstown. They're still coming from Youngstown, right? Next was Detroit. We know why people left Detroit. And fifth on the list was Akron. Do you see a pattern? People were coming from nearby cities, industrial cities, where there wasn't a lot of opportunity. They came to Columbus because of jobs. So next I wanted to ask, well, why is that? Well, Forbes magazine did a list of the most miserable cities in America to live, and guess what? The cities I just showed you made the list of most miserable places in America. Those cities that Debbie Downer would probably love to call home, right? Everybody knows Debbie Downer from Saturday Night Live, I'm sure, right? So the next question was, where do people go when they leave Columbus? And what attracts them, right? Number one place, Phoenix. 264 people left Columbus for Phoenix in 2008. Second on the list was Dallas, followed by Houston, followed by Charlotte, and then Atlanta. Do you see another pattern, right? People were heading south, they were heading west. They were going for sunshine and a little warmer weather, right? Well, this map from Forbes magazine really sums it up. The black lines show the net flow of people into Columbus. The red lines show where people leave Columbus. And the point of the story is Columbus is only attracting people from about a 250-mile radius. Our attractiveness almost entirely stops at the state line. Fascinating, isn't it? So the next question was, 34,000 Americans moved into Greater Columbus, but we added 189,000 people. The other way a city can grow is through international arrivals, and that's when the story started to change. Because about a decade ago, the place of origin that Columbus started pulling people from was much further than those nearby cities along Interstate 70 and 71. They became from places far more exotic. This is a map of Franklin County, and it shows the location of African-born residents in our community. Not African Americans, but African-born. And you can clearly see that Morse Road corridor, which are those dark shaded areas between Northland Mall, or the former Northland Mall, and Northern Lights. In the early 1990s, there were 30 Somalis living in Columbus. And while the census estimate says that number is about 21,000, locals that work in this community say that number is nearly 40,000. We have the second largest concentration of Somalis in North America. We went from 30 to 40,000 in just a generation. But Columbus wasn't the first place of origin for most Somalis. They landed somewhere else in the US. And they came to Columbus because of low-cost living, lots of jobs, and a very welcoming environment. And the other thing about the Somali culture is it's a very strong family network. And so they go to where they know folks. This evolution was very organic for Columbus. Next would be Asians in Columbus. While Ohio State attracts a lot of people who want to study abroad, and you can see that dark concentration around Ohio State University, you also see this kind of northwest Franklin County corridor. That's that whole Tuttle Crossing in Dublin area. Because a lot of the Asians that have come to Columbus come in mid-career, and they come because they already have employment. Columbus has the largest number of Asians of any community in the state of Ohio. If you haven't taken a close look, last time you went down Sawmill, Henderson, or a Bethel Road, you probably should. There are dozens and dozens of Asian businesses in that community, including Golden Delights Bakery at Bethel Center. A personal recommendation of mine to you next time you're out shopping along Sawmill Road. Next would be the Latino community. This is a more recent and harder to track phenomenon in Columbus. And while the census estimate says there are about 22,000 Hispanics in Franklin County, locals that work with this community say the real number, including undocumented workers, is probably around 65,000. But look how suburban this map is, and look how diverse it is. The taco trucks of Columbus, we will have one in the parking lot later, and I didn't know that when I put this in the slide. This is one that's along Cleveland Avenue. And this is just one example of the number of businesses that have been opening up servicing this community. In fact, this local phenomenon is so popular, there's a website now, tacotruckscolumbus.com, which has an interactive map where you can track the location of 35 taco trucks around the city. And what's interesting, they're all over the map, just like the map I just showed you. Now, this picture is not your new Kroger store. It's La Michoacana grocery store, and it replaced the former Sun TV on Morse Road. Would you be surprised if I told you that this Mexican grocery store chain has 9 Columbus locations? 9. They didn't have any 10 years ago. Recently, a friend of mine who moved out of Columbus came back to town, and he lived in the apartment complex behind this store, and he bought a television at that Sun TV location. As we stood there in the produce section, he couldn't believe he was still in Columbus. It's not the same city. What this has resulted in is we now have 100,000 people who live in this community who were not born in the United States, and half of them have arrived in the last 9 years, and that's a conservative figure. When my father and I first made that trip to Columbus, there were less than 30,000 international immigrants in our community. This change is recent, and it's picking up pace, and it is not happening anywhere else in the state of Ohio. I want to put it into perspective for you. It's as if Franklin County added a community the size of Bexley, New Albany, Worthington, and Grandview combined in just international immigrants in the last 9 years. That's a huge change for Columbus. But are we ready? And are we as culturally competent as we could be or should be? It's also resulted in this. The demographic profile of our city hasn't looked this way since William McKinley was president and Albert Einstein developed the theory of relativity. And now we have an African American president and the iPad. Who knew, right? Change is all around us, and its pace is quickening. But where will it take us? What does it mean that more people are moving here from Latin America and Africa than from Dayton and Detroit? Franklin County is also a young community. Not our bridges and houses, but our people are young. If you compare Franklin County to Cuyahoga County, just about 100 miles up Interstate 71 and home to Cleveland, which still has a slightly larger population, in fact, there are about 600 more babies born every year in Franklin County, despite our slightly smaller population. What's more interesting is the number of deaths. In fact, Franklin County has half the number of deaths in a given year than Cuyahoga County, or 6,400 less deaths in a given year. We are on average 6 years younger than our neighbor to the north. And part of that is because a lot of young people come here to learn. In fact, Bloomberg Business Week just ranked Columbus a top 10 city for college graduates, despite the down economy. And the Brookings Institute said that only Boston has a higher per capita rate of college students in the United States. We have 120,000 of them. I, of course, was just one when I came to Columbus and chose to stay. But are we keeping enough of our young people in Columbus? What could we be doing to keep more of our young talent and creative minds? Well, I want to switch gears to something a bit more alarming, and that is where the foreclosure crisis started in Columbus, because there's more you need to know. The foreclosure crisis in Columbus started in 3 neighborhoods, predominantly blue-collar, African-American, near downtown: Linden, Hilltop, and the South Side. 5,000 homes were foreclosed in this period. Now, I want you to watch how the purple bleeds on these maps. This is where it went in the second phase, right? The number of foreclosed properties almost doubled. And this is where the middle-class neighborhoods started to be impacted, and we started to hear about it every day in the media. And then, during this time period, people started to lose jobs. So do you want to know where phase 3 went? Do you? Yes, thank you. Shazam, right? This is phase 3. The reason why you should care about the foreclosure crisis is because for every home that's foreclosed in your neighborhood, your house falls 1% in value. That's why this became a significant issue. More importantly, it leads to this. Each dot on this map of the west side of Columbus, Interstate 70 running diagonally through the map, Franklinton to the right, Hilltop to the left, every dot is a vacant and abandoned house in our community. When this map was done 4 years ago, we had 3,800 abandoned homes in our community, and despite several efforts to save vacant houses, that number is now 5,800 vacant houses. In Cleveland, it's 25,000 abandoned homes. This issue is a problem, and I know it well, because this is a vacant and abandoned home in my neighborhood, Weinland Park. In fact, 20% of the houses in my neighborhood are vacant and abandoned. A study by Community Research Partners said that the cost to the city of Columbus is $10 million a year in both added cost and lost revenue. That cost every man, woman, and child in our city $20 a year. In Cleveland, the cost is $40 million a year, or $200 per person, and it's increasing in both cities. So where does all this take us? International arrivals, young people coming to Columbus, housing neighborhood change. Well, I recently sat down with a good friend of mine, Barb Pratzner, and I think she's out in the audience here today, and she has this wonderful job of being employed with the Columbus International Sister City program. So she meets people from all around the world. This is a picture of a group that recently came from China, and they were waiting to meet with Dr. Gordon Gee at Ohio State. The city they came from is called Hefei. It's a city of about 4.5 million people outside Shanghai, and it's a booming regional capital. And I said to Barb, so what do people from the other side of the planet who come from a place of such progress, what do they think of Columbus after they've left? And she got this funny look on her face, and I thought she was going to say, it's the size of our houses or how ginormous our stores are, and I was even expecting something really sweet like, our business community and politicians really like each other in Columbus. And then she said, oh, and by the way, this picture is gray, not because it's a bad photograph, but it just always looks that way, she says. And so the number one thing they remember about Columbus, squirrels. Oops, squirrels. They remember the squirrels, right? And I thought, well, so much for all those marketing plans we've had the last 30 years. And they remember all the other wildlife that lives among us, right? And so, you know, it was pretty funny. I thought it was funny, and I'm glad you laughed. And I said, so, well, what else do they remember? There's got to be something else they remembered. And that's when I thought she was really going to get into the business side. And she said, they remember blue skies. because they never get to see the sky the way we get to see it. And I thought, oh my God, someone came to Columbus, Ohio, and what they remembered were blue skies. I'm making a t-shirt, and I'm going to make so much money on that, right? Well, and while those are really funny things, I thought to myself, they are, in fact, a very thoughtful response about how others view our world. And it made me think about what's in store for our future here in Columbus. And I thought about back in January 2008 when 1,700 people showed up for a public meeting. 1,700 people showed up to talk about Columbus's future. That's amazing. You know, our bicentennial will be here soon, and it will be a moment for civic engagement and civic pride. It'll be a moment, but it's up to us to do with it what we want. People will continue to move here from nearby cities and from faraway lands. Young people will continue to come here to learn. And family and ethnic businesses will continue to replace chain stores. And while many of our neighborhoods are challenged, our problems are nothing like our nearby competitors. But it's up to us to do with what we have. And it made me think about something one of my mentors said to me about 15 years ago, Cleve Ricksecker. And he said, you know, there's really not that much difference between successful people and not so successful people, except for the fact that successful people just make more decisions. If on average only 10% of your decisions are successful, but you make 100 big decisions, you're going to get 10 home runs. But if you only make 10 decisions, you only get one good one. And it made me think that people are a lot like cities. You know, it's been 27 years since my dad and I first made that trip to Columbus, and my commitment to this city is now only deeper. I love my city. I love my little troubled neighborhood and the people that I share it with. But I want to end with this. I want you to think about the neighborhood down the street from where you might live. And I want you to think about that person next time you're at a store that struggles with English. I want you to think about all the young people who come here every year and how many of them will stay. I want you to think about that market that replaces an electronic superstore or that website that tracks taco trucks. Change is all around us, and I think it brings great creativity and opportunity right to our doorstep. I think Columbus is going to have to make a lot of decisions in the next few years, and I hope that they are informed decisions where we really take a look at ourselves. Some of those decisions will be home runs, but most of them will fail. But I also want us to think about the squirrels and the blue skies, because those are pretty important to our future as well. So thank you for your attention today.